Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video, and in this one, I will be reviewing and ranking the ranged DPS specializations in the Shadowlands pre-patch when it comes to PvP. As we all know, Shadowlands has been delayed, and it's still uncertain as to when it's going to come out, so this pre-patch could last for a substantial amount of time. So the purpose of this tier list is to provide you with some information and making a selection on one of these specializations to try and play in the pre-patch, and also give you some warnings potentially of specs that are performing really good right now in the pre-patch but maybe losing out on something or not obtaining something in the future, or vice versa. They might not be performing excellently right now in the pre-patch, but they may get something new in Shadowlands when it comes to Covenant abilities, and that's the main purpose of this tier list here. So let's get started. We've got Affliction Warlock up on the chopping block first. This is a specialization that I think a lot of Warlock players have been waiting a long time to have its moment in the sun. Destruction has been outshining it for the better part of 2 years, and I do think at this point in the current pre-patch, Affliction is absolutely a force of domination, bringing in things like Amplify Curse from Honor talents and making their Curse of Tongues and their Curse of Exhaustion really amplified onto classes that can't remove these. You can just prevent a caster from casting or completely snare up a melee. Demonic Circle baselines, increasing your mobility, but I think more importantly, your damage output is in a formidable position, unlike it has been for the past 2 years. A lot of other things are attributing to it as well, with Azerite traits and essences, more particularly with Crucible of Flame being a significant portion of damage for basically every spec. If you haven't switched that essence on, whether it's minor or major, you definitely should try it in either slot for your specialization, because from the meters that I'm seeing from watching streams and testing myself, it's sometimes upwards of 15 to 20% of your damage. And then things like Reaping Flame, minor, doing more damage on a low health target with this high bursty pressure. You get a target low, reap triggers, executes the target, and you finish it off. So the synergy between these two essences and high damage overall, which I'm personally thankful to see, and I am hoping that there isn't too much negative reception to high damage, because Battle for Azeroth, in my mind, main flaw was a lack of damage and PvP feeling very slow. So right now, for me, it's a breath of fresh air to see a lot of specs getting this damage increase. So I'm hoping that not too much is taken into Affliction moving into Shadowlands itself, because again, from my testing on the beta, Shadowlands Affliction is a good spec, but I wouldn't rank it as high as I'm about to rank it here on the pre-patch. In the pre-patch, I think it's a spec that has high sustainability, good kiting and avoidance, and I'm talking PvP all around, arenas, battlegrounds, one-on-one. It's a spec that's doing great. It's an S tier specialization at the moment in terms of performance in the pre-patch, but I would warn you in its current standing in Shadowlands that I would drop it down from the S tier as it currently stands. And it seems like it's getting a lot of negative attention in terms of its damage output, which may be more likely that it draws nerfs from it. So moving into Shadowlands, it's a spec that could fall off. But at the moment, if you've been waiting to get that fix on Affliction Lock, now would be the time to do it. Arcane Mage here, the only mage specialization that retained Temporal Shield for added defense on top of its mobility, but losing displacement kind of took it down a little bit of a peg there. So in my mind, it's still doing a lot of damage with Arcane Missiles. You're just basically a missile bot just sitting there channeling them out, pumping a lot of single target damage. You're still a mage, so you've got mobility and crowd control, the standard things for Arcane. Not much has changed. I don't think that it's an S tier specialization. Being able to be locked on Arcane and not have too much else to do when you're interrupted and bursted down in stuns has some really big drawbacks. In the hands of a good player, it's obviously a phenomenal specialization in PvP, and all around you can't go wrong really with a mage and things like battlegrounds or in solo play. So in my mind, it's an A tier specialization as it currently stands. Beast Mastery Hunter is a spec that it's kind of just tough. The pet res being 4 seconds long and you entirely depending on your pet damage, and I gave the same feedback towards survival. In random battlegrounds, your pet is just going to die to nothing. Pretty much nothing. There's a lot of area of effect abilities that are not currently flagged to reduce damage on pets, things like Sweeping Strikes. I mean, they would have to go through the entire list because I think it's a large portion of them. If you send your pet in a battle, it's basically dying. In 1v1, sure, it's still really good, I think, as it's just got standard sustained damage, kill shot coming back for execute pressure with Reaping Miner, Crucible Flame buffing up its damage. It's just kind of a lot of instant cast damage, so it's hard to disrupt it. So it's really good in that environment. But in high focused arenas or battleground content, your pet is going to become a real liability. I think it is going to be a big problem. If they look into reducing area of effect damage onto the pet, because I think it is a good mechanic for a hunter to need to mend pet their pet, pay attention to its health, and sort of maintain it as it's a strength and should be a weakness. Right now, your pet just dies to random procs and flame procs and AoEs, and you're just going to be casting res pet most of the time. So while it is good in 1v1, it's a spec that I think is going to suffer a bit. I'm not going to put it all the way on the bottom because it does redeem itself in one-on-one if you're doing random battlegrounds and maybe even 2v2 skirmishes or something like this for some fun in the pre-patch. You'll have fun in those situations, but overall, that one big drawback is dragging the spec down a lot at the moment. Boomkin is a specialization that I've been playing a lot. I think it is really good at the moment. Most of its damage, although you may have seen in a Rex Troy video, he's like one-shotting people with Starfall or something. My personal testing, when you're the only balanced druid with Starfall, it's okay, but it's not amazing. I would still prioritize Star Surge because this is your hardest hitting burst attack, like 2.5k non-crit, upwards of 6.5k crit on a 20k health pool. I much rather chunk a target down and remove a member of play than use Starfall and kind of like pad the meter and everyone's health is like sort of not moving. It still doesn't feel really fantastic in PvP specifically, but the ability to just chunk down a target, Heart of the Wild Bear Farm, Frenzied Regeneration. In my mind, Boomkin it's in a solid spot. It's in an A tier position, and it's a position where I think it will carry over. I have my own personal biases towards why I don't enjoy Balanced Druid as much, and it's more so the distribution of its damage. I think it's too heavily put into Star Surge, so that as a Balanced Druid, if I don't maintain my dots really well and I don't really hardcast, it doesn't ultimately matter in my ability to win. As long as I can 2-tap somebody with Star Surge and Solar Beam them, I'll be able to win. And I don't like that because it means I'm only focusing on one aspect of the class. I'd like the damage to be distributed more evenly throughout its ability, something like Affliction Warlock is or like a Shadow Priest is. That would be my own personal bias to it. Doesn't mean that it's not competitive. It doesn't mean that it won't be fun if you're interested in just blasting and bursting down a target, having good recovery with Heart of the Wild, insane mobility. It's all around a really good spec. That's why I'm putting it on the A tier despite my own personal biases. Demonology, it suffers the same problems as Beast Mastery with their res pet being on a long cooldown. They do have Fel Domination, but it's a 3-minute cooldown where you can get your Fel Guard back alive. This is a spec much like Beast Mastery where it's really good in duels. It's good in 1v1 scenarios, but in random battlegrounds, your pet is just fodder for random AoE. You're going to have to deal with resurrecting it. If you get tunneled down by multiple melee classes and interrupted over and over, it can become really annoying because you need to cast Hand of Gul'dan a lot. Affliction can somewhat get around this, which is using Corruption, Agony, Exhaustion, and sort of moving around with instant cast dots to keep its damage high until eventually a target is off of itself. But Demonology is just lacking in that regard. It's still heavily reliant on Demonic Tyrant. It's the same weaknesses basically for Battle for Azeroth. Some quality of life where you get your Demonic Circle baseline for mobility, but your pet dying is still too big of a drawback in my mind, which is why on the pre-patch I'd still currently give it a D. It's very similar to Beast Mastery in terms of its overall weaknesses, and it's all directly aimed at the pet. While I do think it is important for Warlocks to focus on their pets, at the moment, I think the list of area of effect spells needs to be looked at and reduced in PvP on the pet specifically. Affliction also gets around this because they sacrifice their pet to get more damage flat out, and they don't have to deal with their Fell Hunter dying. That would be something holding them back if that sacrifice talent wasn't so good and wasn't baseline basically for every Affliction Warlock at the moment. But Demonology doesn't have that. You need to have the pet, and it is a significant drawback. But do take a note, if you want to do 1v1 dueling stuff like that, Demonology is really good in that aspect. Destruction Warlock, this is a specialization that's been #1 for a really long time. In my mind, I think Affliction is now passing it, but not by much. Destruction is still just really durable, multiple schools of magic, and I'm seeing a lot of Rain of Fire builds. And this was coming out with the new Infernal talent that's replacing Grimoire, where you just have chances to call in more and more Infernals, and you can ramp up a ton of AoE damage with that. You still have Chaos Bolt. You can really never go wrong with Chaos Bolt, so in Battlegrounds, it still remains a real force to be reckoned with. And then in Arenas, with this new Rain of Fire build that I've seen in EU, it's looking really competitive still. It's a spec where Affliction might be just slightly outshiny it, but I don't know for how much longer. And with all the attention on Affliction, and its ability to get high scoreboard damage, it gets even more attention. Destruction doesn't do that because it doesn't have all the pad dot damage. It's a spec that is on the A tier, and I think it's a spec that would likely carry over into Shadowlands at a high level like that. Now, Elemental Shaman, this is a specialization that is absolutely insane. It's doing insane healing, good support, good mobility with Ghost Wolf, Lava Burst, and Stormkeeper, and Blood of the Enemy in particular for this specialization, because the way crit damage was basically buffed in PvP, it had been reduced significantly. Now that reduction has been alleviated, and since Elemental Shaman crits on every Lava Burst, it's heavily relying on it. With Blood of the Enemy, you can get really big Stormkeeper lightning bolts, and it's easily self-sustainable. Very fun specialization overall. I gave it a top ranking in my top 5 PvP specs videos. If you want to check that out, I'll have a link to it at the end of the video. It's a spec in my mind that's currently S tier, much like the Affliction Warlock. It's just doing a ton of damage. It synergizes really well with Crucible of Flame and Reaping Flames, and that crit change really beefed it up. And also, Gladiator's medallions are no longer baseline. You need to go to a vendor and buy them, and a lot of people don't know that, or they don't want to put it on because the medallion is a 68 item level. They'd rather wear their 130 mythic raid trinket, which means players can't trinket your lightning lasso because they're probably not wearing one and don't know it exists. So you should try to snag a lot of lightning lassos. You might think like, oh, they'll just break out of it. They might not have a trinket. So all of these compiling together is really making Elemental Shaman in a good position. Healing Stream Totem baseline too is a big deal. Just an instant cast heal, and it's doing a lot of healing, is really bumping Elemental Shaman up there. Fire Mage, much like the Destruction Warlock, was basically the top wizard of Battle for Azeroth. Greater Pyro's on a cooldown. That definitely is dragging the spec down a bit, but with how bursty the game currently is, it still runs people over with Combustion, synergies with Crucible of Flame and Reaping Flame. Another downside in my mind is that Temporal is now not available to it, at least not at the moment, for Fire specifically. I think that does hold the spec back a bit, but you have multiple schools of magic, and you're still a mage. You still have Polymorph and Frost Nova. It's not as good. I don't think that it's up on the S tier anymore. I had a bit of an internal debate when I was first constructing this and thinking about it, whether or not I wanted to put it on the same tier as Arcane, because Arcane still retains a lot of its own defensive capabilities. The main reason that I feel that it does deserve to be on the same tier as Arcane, because while it lacks defense, it makes it up in offense. You'll run down a target really quickly on single target during your combustion at the moment. And you can play Greater Pyro in random battlegrounds and just get one of them, but you won't spam it. It's not nearly as obnoxious as it was. In my mind, I think it's still an A tier specialization on the pre-patch. I'm a bit worried about it falling off moving into Shadowlands itself, because I think that damage is kind of padded up at the moment in the pre-patch by essences and Azerite traits that aren't available. Perhaps the legendaries and the Soulbind conduits will add a similar effect, but that's still yet to be shown. The good thing is, as a mage, that you have 3 specs, so whether you want to try some fire right now, although I feel like a lot of people probably want to spice things up and try something else, an Arcane or a Frost Mage, and what do you know, we've got Frost Mage coming up on the list here. Frost Mage is doing an absurd amount of damage with Ice Lance. I mean, I'm seeing posts of it being like 80% of the damage of the Mage. I think that's a similar problem in terms of playstyle as I was criticizing Balance Druid, where it would be better for this damage to be distributed more, maybe perhaps into Frostbolt, to reward the mage for free casting and punish enemy targets for not properly shutting down the caster. I think that this is more fun gameplay wise, but regardless, in terms of its overall strength, Frostmage slows are some of the most powerful in the game, if not the most powerful slows in the game. So you're going to have complete control of the battlefield with Blizzard and Frozen Orb and random battlegrounds, and you're just going to be slapping Ice Lances that are doing an insane amount of damage at the moment. And the Ice Lance damage does carry over, and I think Frostmage is likely to be in the same position in Shadowlands in terms of its overall power and capability. So at this time, I would say that Frostmage is an S tier specialization. It still retains all of the same potency that Mage brings to the table, but with the slows added on top of it, and it's more readily available instant cast damage through Ice Lance and Frozen Orb. I think it makes it a bit more accessible to just kill a target, as opposed to the cooldown required combustion of Fire Mage or the interrupt shutdown of an Arcane Mage on their missiles. I think it puts Frost slightly above on that S tier. Marksmanship Hunter, unlike BM and Survival, you don't need to worry about your pet. You just get rid of that. You get 10% more damage. You get a double tap aim shot from Camouflage. The target's probably pretty close to dead, if not dead. This is a specialization that I think is also transferring that potential over into Shadowlands. The main downside for me on Marksmanship Hunter is what happens if you don't kill someone instantly. Well, you get tunneled down, can be difficult to deal with. It's all about your opener. So you want to make sure that you get your opener, Camouflage, double tap, true shot, try and kill somebody as quickly as possible. Things do start to pitter off a little bit with that. You can support it with your partners, obviously, in 3v3 arena to try and drag on a fight, like having a healer. And then, of course, in random battlegrounds, you just can stay really far back from any engagement. And then, yeah, you kill the target, then you just wait, recharge, and then load up and do it again. Because of the amount of damage that it can do, I think that alone puts it onto S tier. And because it doesn't need to deal with the weaknesses and the downsides of the pets dying like Beast Mastery and Survival need to do because their core rotations function off their pet, I think that it's an S tier specialization at this current time. And finally, we've got the Shadow Priest, and this is a spec that seems to be like Blizzard's love child when it comes to reworks, at least at the moment. This is a spec that is absolutely crazy. Its damage feels really good the way that it's distributed, and some of the main reasons that it's good is its self-sustainability. Powered Shield is a really big heal at the moment. Shadowmend got buffed to increase all healing you do to yourself by an amount after you Shadowmend yourself. Devouring Plague heals. Devouring Plagues now roll into each other for big damage and also self-sustainability. So this is a heavy rot spec. You're almost always going to be top of the battleground meter with this one. You can burst, but without mind games from the Venthyr Covenant and Shadowlands, your burst isn't comparable in my mind to Frostmage, Marksman, Ellie burst. But again, the sustainability, the team utility, and the defensive cooldowns like Greater Fade and Dispersion make up for that. It puts it onto an S tier. While I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the meta, because the meta is just erase you as quickly as possible, it still has amazing rot. And moving into Shadowlands, it just gets even more, right? It gets access to burst damage, and now with new talents where when you're in Void form you get 30% crit, that is scaling with the buffs to crit, and then your apparitions are triggering more. So just all around, this spec feels amazing. It's going to be a top contender, and if you're a fantastic player with it, you are going to be insane. In my mind, it's still the #1 spec when it comes to pre-patch and Shadowlands for like a top level player. It's just at the moment with how high burst is, that's why I didn't get into my top 5 PvP spec list, but it's still really good and solid, and we're obviously just gonna slop that one up there over to the S tier. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that the information in this video was helpful to you in trying to figure out what you want to do here with the pre-patch and the downtime before Shadowlands, and kind of help you talk through which one of these specs are being held back, why they're being held back, which ones will be enabled even further, or potentially actually enabled when Shadowlands comes out. That was the main goal of the channel. If you like this type of content, I'm uploading every single day, so please subscribe to the channel. I'll have a subscribe button here. It's absolutely free, and it's just going to let you know when my videos are live, so you can keep yourself up to date in the know-how, because they're doing a lot of class balance changes. I'm trying to stay on top of that. They're doing a lot of item changes, trying to stay on top of that, make sure that my information is always relevant for you on the channel here. Other than that, I'll list links to my class recommendations and some of my tier lists if you're curious of checking out all the aspects of World of Warcraft and Shadowlands. This is your one-stop shop. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.